I have been asked more than once what it was that changed me. My steward thinks it was the winter of 1815, when the pipes at Vale Hall froze solid, and I was forced to speak to more than 4 people in a single day. My housekeeper, Mrs. Dallow, believes it was the kitten my sister sent from Bath, which I refused to name and still somehow fed cream to every morning for 6 years. My solicitor, a careful man who has known me since I was 19, suspects it was the war, that whatever came back from the peninsula was simply a quieter, less destructive version of what had gone in. They are all wrong. It was a woman at my gate at 3:30 in the morning on the 14th of December, in the worst blizzard the moorland had seen in 11 years. She was barely standing. Her coat was torn at both shoulders and her left boot had lost its heel entirely. She had no gloves, no hat, no lantern. She had a cut above her right eye that had bled down the side of her face and frozen there, dark against pale skin, and she was holding the iron bar of the gate with both hands, not to open it, but simply to remain upright. I had gone out myself because my groundskeeper's dog had been barking for 20 minutes, and I did not trust anyone else to investigate. I was annoyed. I was carrying a lamp and a temper, and I came around the north corner of the estate wall expecting to find a lame horse or a drifted gate, and instead I found her. She looked up at me. "Please," she said, only the one word. Her voice was absolutely level, which was the first strange thing about her, not a plea exactly, more like a statement of intention. I opened the gate. I have wondered sometimes what I would have done if she had wept. I suspect I would still have let her in, but the fact that she did not, that she simply looked at me with those gray eyes full of a clarity that had no business being in anyone's face after 3 days on the moor in December, I think that is what made me carry her rather than merely escort her. She could not walk without listing badly to the left, and I could see that she knew it and was furious about it, and I put my arm around her without asking, and she accepted it without comment, and we went in. That is how it began. Her name was Marin Ashby. I learned this 3 hours later, when she had been installed in the warmest guest room in the East Wing, and Mrs. Dallow had done what Mrs. Dallow does, which is to say, commandeered 2 housemaids and a footman, produced hot water and bandages and a bowl of broth from what seemed like thin air, and managed the whole operation with the calm competence of a woman who has never once in her life found a crisis inconvenient. I stood in the corridor. This was, I recognized, not a useful place to stand. I went to the library. I did not read anything. I sat in the chair nearest the fire and listened to the wind take the north side of the house and thought about what I had seen in her face. I am not a man who responds to distress as a general rule. The war had arranged for me to encounter it in such quantities that the mechanism had simply stopped engaging after a while. I do not say this with pride. It is merely what happened. And yet, I had carried her up the stairs. She had weighed nothing. She had not made a sound even when the movement clearly hurt her. There was something wrong with her right side, either the ribs or the shoulder, I could not tell, and I had tried to be careful and she had not flinched once, which told me either that she was braver than anyone had a right to be or that she was too cold to feel it yet. Both possibilities, I found, made something in me go very still and very deliberate. Mrs. Dallow came to find me at 4:30. "She's sleeping," she said from the doorway. "She would not tell me what happened until she'd spoken with you, sir. She was most particular about that." "Did you ask her what happened?" "I asked her if she needed a doctor. She said yes. I asked her if there was anyone I ought to send for. She said not yet." Mrs. Dallow looked at me. She has worked at Vale Hall for 31 years, and she has a way of looking at me that suggests I am a moderately interesting problem she expects to solve before luncheon. She asked if the gates were locked. I had locked them myself, coming back in without quite deciding to do so. "They are." "Good," said Mrs. Dallow, in a tone that implied she had expected nothing less, and went back to bed. I sat in the library until the fire burned low and the windows went from black to the pale gray of a December dawn. The blizzard was still running. Nothing was moving on the moor. I watched it for a long time. She slept for 14 hours. I know this because I was aware of it, not in any way I care to examine too closely, but in the way that a man is aware of an unlocked door or a single lamp burning in an otherwise dark house. The hall was quieter than usual. My household, which is not given to gossip because I have never permitted it, was nonetheless moving with a careful deliberateness that told me Mrs. Dallow had spoken to them all. I dealt with the estate business that needed dealing with. I wrote 2 letters. I walked the north boundary with my groundskeeper, Purvis, who had the sense not to ask anything about the gate, though I could see he wanted to. The moor was empty. The snow had covered every track. I came back inside and changed my boots and found, before I had made any decision about it, that I was standing in the corridor outside the east guest room. She was awake. The door was open. She was sitting up in bed with the breakfast tray untouched, which told me she had waited, and she looked at me when I appeared in the doorway with the same steadiness she had shown at the gate, and I thought, there is something badly wrong here, and she is not going to make it easy on me by crying about it. I came in and sat in the chair by the window. "Tell me," I said. And she did. She had been companion and reader to a Mrs. Hardcastle of Caldwell House, 3 miles north-northeast of Vale Hall across the moor. Mrs. Hardcastle was a widow, elderly, comfortable, and had been Marin's employer for 2 years. The work was quiet. The situation was not ideal. It never is for a woman in that position, which I understood even then, though I understood it better later, but it was honest and it suited her. 8 days before I found her at the gate, 3 men had arrived at Caldwell House. They came in the evening after supper and were admitted because Mrs. Hardcastle knew one of them, a man she addressed as Mr. Lorne, whom Marin understood to be connected to the late Mr. Hardcastle's affairs. The other 2 were not introduced. They went into the study with Mrs. Hardcastle and closed the door. Marin had been in the library, which shared a wall. She had not intended to hear. She had stayed very still because she understood, almost immediately, that leaving would be more dangerous than remaining. She heard Mrs. Hardcastle say that she had given the letters to someone for safekeeping and would not say to whom. She heard Mr. Lorne's voice change register entirely. She heard a chair fall. She heard a sound she could not describe to me and did not try to. Then she heard the 3 men moving very quickly and purposefully through the house, and she went out of the library window and into the kitchen garden, and she ran. She ran, she told me, because she had heard her own name. She had not understood why at the time. Later she thought they must have seen her earlier in the house and marked her as someone who might have been in the library. "You ran across open moorland," I said, "in December at night with no preparation." "I had my coat," she said, "and I took a knife from the kitchen garden wall on my way past, a grafting knife. It was the only thing to hand." I looked at her. "Did you use it?" "Once," she said. "The second night, the tall one got close." She said this exactly as she had said everything else, level, factual, without apology or embellishment. "I don't believe I did him serious harm, enough to make him cautious." "They were 3 nights behind you." 2.5. "They rested the first night, I didn't." I said nothing for a moment. "Mrs. Hardcastle," I said, though I already knew. "I don't know," she said. "I heard enough to believe she is not well. I hope I am wrong." She looked out the window at the moor, at the white expanse of it, absolutely blank now under fresh snow. She was kind to me, in her way. There was a pause. The fire shifted. "The men," I said, "you can describe them." "I can describe all 3 in considerable detail," she said. "I had 3 days to think about very little else." She told me about Lorne first, a man of middle age, thick-built, with a scar across the left eyebrow that she suspected was old, and a ring on his right hand that had a crest she had not been able to see clearly. He spoke with the accent of the West Country, but she did not think it was native. He had directed the other two. The second man was younger, late 20s, perhaps 30, fair-haired, and had a military bearing that he did not quite conceal. He was the one she had cut. He would be moving carefully. The third she had seen only at a distance, but he was tall, taller than either of the others, and he had moved very fast when she had expected him not to, which she thought was the most useful thing to know about him. "You catalogued them," I said, "while you were running from them." "I catalogued them so that I could run from them more intelligently," she said. "There is a difference." I stood up. I went to the window and looked out at the moor, and I thought about 3 men somewhere in that white blankness, who were either still hunting or had assumed she was dead in a drift somewhere, and were making their way back to wherever they had come from. I did not know which I preferred. A man who stops hunting is harder to find than a man who is still moving. "How much does anyone know about Mrs. Hardcastle's affairs?" I asked. "The letters she mentioned, what were they?" "I don't know. She never spoke of Mr. Hardcastle's business to me. I was her reader, novels mostly. Correspondence she'd dictate herself. I was not privy to anything of consequence." She paused. "Or I thought I wasn't." "But they knew your name." "They knew my name." I turned back from the window. "You will stay here," I said. She looked at me with the expression of a woman who has made her own calculations and arrived at the same answer independently. "Yes," she said. "I think that would be sensible, for a day or two until—" "Until this is resolved," I said. "Not a day or two, until it is resolved, which means until I know what happened to Mrs. Hardcastle and until those 3 men are located and dealt with." She was quiet for a moment. "You say 'dealt with,'" she said, "in a way that suggests you are accustomed to arranging that sort of thing." "I commanded a regiment for 4 years," I said. "I am accustomed to arranging a great many things." "The Duke of Ashburn," she said, not quite a question. She had known who I was since I opened the gate, I realized. She had known and said nothing, and used the single word that would get her inside. And then she had waited and slept and calculated. And now she was looking at me with those clear gray eyes and doing something that I can only describe as weighing me up, in the way that a very particular kind of person weighs you up, not for what you own or what you can do for them, but for whether you are what you appear to be. "Yes," I said. She appeared to have reached a verdict. She picked up the spoon beside the broth bowl and began to eat. "I sent Purvis into Ashburn village that afternoon with 2 tasks and instructions to be quiet about both of them. The first was to learn anything that had come out of Caldwell House in the last 8 days, any visitor, any errand, any rumor carried by a dairyman or a postboy. The second was to send word to my solicitor in the city, a man named Goss who had certain connections I did not ordinarily require, asking him to make discreet inquiries about a man named Lorne, West Country origin, military associates. Mrs. Dallow came to me after supper with her report on the patient, which was delivered with the brisk efficiency of a military dispatch. 2 cracked ribs, not broken, confirmed by the local physician whom she had summoned from the village on my authority. A sprained left ankle, not broken either. The cut above the eye superficial but requiring attention. The cold had been the worst of it, and that was already resolving with warmth and food. The young woman, Mrs. Dallow added, had thanked her without making a production of it, which Mrs. Dallow appeared to consider the correct response to being saved from freezing to death on a moor. "She asked," Mrs. Dallow said in a slightly different tone, "whether she was inconveniencing you." "What did you say?" "I said you were not the sort of man who could be inconvenienced by something you had chosen to do." This was, I reflected, more charitable than accurate. I am, in fact, inconvenienced by a great many things I choose to do. I simply do not find the inconvenience sufficient reason to stop doing them. She also asked, Mrs. Dallow continued, whether there were other approaches to the estate, besides the north gate. East and west, I said. The east is watched from the tower room. The west runs along the ha-ha. Anyone crossing it would be visible from the upper windows for 200 yards in either direction. I'll tell her. Do. Mrs. Dallow did not leave immediately. She stood in the doorway with the expression that meant she was going to say something she had decided to say, and had been choosing her moment for. She's not what I expected, she said finally. What did you expect? Someone more undone, she considered. Most people after what she's described would be undone. She isn't. No, I said. I'm not sure, Mrs. Dallow said carefully, that I've met a woman quite like her. She left. I sat with that for a while. I was not sure I had either. She was well enough to come downstairs on the third day. I found her in the library. She had come in quietly. I had not heard her, and she was standing at the shelves along the east wall with her hand on the spine of a book, her head slightly tilted, reading the titles along the row. She was wearing a dress that had been found from somewhere, Mrs. Dallow again, resourceful to the point of miracle, and her hair was up, simply done, and she had her back to me. She did not hear me come in. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then I said, "The estate maps are on the third shelf, left of the window." She turned. She was not startled, or if she was, she had finished being startled before she completed the turn. "I wasn't looking for maps," she said, "though I'd like to see them if I may." "You may." She moved to the shelves by the window. I went to the desk and did not pick up anything that needed reading, because I had become aware, somewhere in the preceding 3 days, that my concentration had a problem which I was going to need to address at some point. She found the maps without help. She unrolled the oldest one, the estate survey, which was 70 years out of date but the most legible, and she studied it with her elbows on the reading stand and her fingers tracing the track lines across the moor. "Here," she said without looking up. "This track, the one that runs northeast from the far boundary, does it still go through?" I came around the desk. I looked where she was pointing. "It silted up at the crossing about 10 years ago. The north section is passable in dry ground. Not in snow." "And this one?" "That's the Drove Road. Passable year-round, but it comes out at the Ashford Road half a mile north of the village. Anyone traveling it from the north would pass the toll house." "Would the toll house keeper know a stranger?" "Malve has kept that gate for 22 years, I said. "He knows every face on the moor." She nodded. She was building something in her mind. I could see it, mapping the terrain the way she had mapped the 3 men, the way she had mapped the window out of the library at Caldwell House, finding the exits, understanding the ground. "You are planning," I said. "I am always planning," she said, quite simply, as if this were a basic condition of life. For her, I supposed it had been. I studied her profile. There was a bruise along her left jaw that was turning yellow at the edges, and the cut above her eye was healing cleanly. She looked, in the gray December light from the window, like someone who had come a very long way and intended to keep going. "What is your plan?" I asked. "At the moment," she said, "I am waiting for yours." She had been at Vale Hall for 6 days when they came. Purvis had brought word from the village on the 4th day. Caldwell House was shut, the staff dismissed, and Mrs. Hardcastle had been conveyed to Bath for her health, or so the story ran. No one Purvis had spoken to believed it. Mrs. Hardcastle had not been to Bath in 7 years, and had said the previous winter that she never intended to go again. A doctor had come out from the city on the day after the night in question, and 2 men had been seen riding hard on the North Road before dawn. Goss wrote on the 5th day. He was careful in his phrasing, as he always is, but the substance was clear. The name Lorne attached to a man of business with interests in property law and the management of certain estates for widows and minor heirs. There had been questions in the past about the management of those interests. Nothing proven. The names of 2 men who worked with him occasionally, a former army corporal named Fitch, fair-haired, dishonorably discharged, and a very large man known only as Crail. I told Marin everything. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Property. Mrs. Hardcastle's estate." Or what her husband's estate contained that she knew about. The letters. She was quiet for a moment. She said she had given them to someone for safekeeping. She wouldn't say who. She looked at me. Do you think she meant me? I think Lorne thought she might have. Marin sat with that. I watched her work through it, through the implication of it, through what it meant about her own position. She was sitting very still in the chair by the window, and the afternoon light was coming in flat and cold from the moor, and she looked, for just a moment, like someone who had been holding something at arm's length and had finally let it get close enough to feel. She was kind to me, she said again, quietly, without self-pity, just a fact she was sitting with. I said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. After a moment she straightened. The stillness resolved into something more deliberate. I need to write to my cousin in Dorset. She should be warned, in case they try to trace me through my family. Give the letter to Mrs. Dallow. She'll see it goes. And I need, she stopped. She looked down at her hands folded in her lap. I need to not be a passenger in this, she said with some difficulty. I understand the constraints. I understand that I'm here because I cannot safely be anywhere else at the moment, and that you are managing the problem and I should let you manage it. I understand all of that, but I need to not be entirely passive. I have not asked you to be passive, I said. I have asked you to be here. Those are different things. She looked up at me. The terrain mapping, I said. Your descriptions of the three men. You know the geography of Caldwell House. You know Mrs. Hardcastle's routine, her callers, anything that deviated in the weeks before. All of that is useful and I need it. Sit across from me this evening and give it to me systematically, and I will tell you what I do with it. Something in her face shifted very slightly. Not relief exactly. Something more self-contained than relief. All right, she said. We sat in the library that evening until close to midnight. She was extraordinarily methodical. She had a memory that fixed on detail the way a cartographer fixes on landmarks. The name of the solicitor who had visited Caldwell House in October, the color of the ribbon on a package delivered the week before the men came, the exact phrase Mrs. Hardcastle had used when she received a letter the previous month that had made her set it aside very carefully and look out the window for rather a long time. I wrote it all down. Goss would know what to do with some of it. Other pieces, I was beginning to understand myself. We were talking about the letters when the library fell quiet at the same moment we both heard it. Boots on the front steps, and a knock that was heavier than it should have been. We looked at each other. The east approach, I said. How many horses? 2, I think. I wasn't certain. She had moved to the window without my noticing, and she was standing to the side of it, not in the line of sight from outside. The gate. Does Purvis check it at night? He's checked it every night this week. I had stood. You will go upstairs, the east wing. The door at the end of the passage locks from the inside. I won't. Marin. I had not used her name before, I realized. The word came out more firmly than I intended. She heard something in it and stopped. I am not sending you away from something you should be part of. I am putting you out of reach so that I can deal with this without worrying about you. Those are also different things. A pause, short but particular. All right, she said. She went. I heard her on the stairs, light, fast, no wasted movement. Then I heard nothing. I went to the front door. There were 3 of them. Lorne I recognized from Marin's description, middle height, thick through the chest, the scar through the left eyebrow visible even in lamplight, the ring on his right hand catching the light from the hall. The fair-haired one, Fitch, was standing a little behind and to the left, and I could see by the way he held himself that his right side was still troubling him. The third man, Crail, was exactly as described, very large and very contained, and standing in a position I recognized from the war as the position of a man who has been told to wait, but expects not to wait long. "Your Grace," Lorne said, with the ease of a man accustomed to doorways. "I am sorry to call at this hour. We are looking for a young woman, a servant who absconded from a house to the north, some days ago, in some distress. We have reason to believe she may have sought shelter in this direction." He said it well. There was the right amount of concern in it and the right amount of deference. "You'd better come in," I said. I took them to the front hall. Not the library, the front hall, which is large and cold and not calculated to put anyone at their ease, which is one of the things I appreciate about it. I stood in the middle of it. Lorne began again about the missing servant, the distress, the concern of her employer. I let him talk for slightly longer than was comfortable. Then I said, "I know who you are." He stopped. "You are Thomas Lorne," I said. "You are a man of business with interests in the management of estates belonging to widows and minor heirs, and your management of those interests has been the subject of inquiry on at least 2 occasions. The man behind you was discharged from the army for conduct I will not trouble you with here. The one at the door is known to be employed in certain negotiations that have very little to do with business law. I let that sit for a moment. I also know what happened at Caldwell House on the 6th of December." Lorne's face had done several things in quick succession. It had settled now into something careful. "I don't know what you think you will not," I said, "find the young woman here. She is not here. She passed through this estate 3 days ago and I did not admit her. I believe she continued south and I have no knowledge of where she may be now." I said all of this without inflection, which is something the war taught me. A lie delivered flatly, without any architecture of persuasion around it, sounds more credible than an elaborately supported truth. What I do know is that if I hear the name Marin Ashby in connection with events at Caldwell House, in any form, from any direction, before the law has had the opportunity to examine what happened there, I will ensure that the 2 inquiries that have been conducted into your affairs become rather more than inquiries. I have certain connections in the city. I am not above using them. Silence. Crail at the door had not moved. Fitch had. "I'd advise against that," I said without looking at Fitch. "You are in pain. You are in my house, and there are 4 men of mine within earshot of this hall who will be in here before you finish the thought." Fitch stopped. I looked at Lorne. "Is there anything else?" I said. There was not. They left. I stood in the front hall after the door closed and listened to the hoofbeats on the drive, 2 horses, not 3, and for a moment I could not account for the third, and then I heard a sound from above. The door at the far end of the east passage, the one that locked from the inside. It opened. Then footsteps on the upper landing. She came to the top of the stairs and looked down. I looked up. "Well," she said. "3 men left," I said, "on 2 horses." A short pause. "Crail," she said. "I expect so." "You expected it." "I prepared for it." There is a distinction. I looked up at her for a moment. There is a groom waiting in the east paddock. He has a lamp and a very loud voice. If Crail is on the grounds, he will not be on the grounds quietly for long. She came down the stairs. She was not hurrying exactly, but she was not taking her time either. When she reached the bottom, she was close enough that I could see her face clearly in the hall lamplight, and there was something in it I had not quite seen before, not fear, which I had never seen in her, but something that was working harder than usual to stay composed. "You told him I wasn't here," she said. "I told him you had passed through, and I had not admitted you." "That is technically—" "Yes." She looked at me. "Why?" I had been asked easier questions. "Because you were in the locked room at the end of the east passage," I said, "and 3 men who do not behave like men with a clean conscience were standing in my hall, and the answer seemed obvious." "You could have handed me over," she said. "It would have been simpler." Simpler is not a value I hold in particularly high regard, I said. She was quiet for a moment. The lamp in the hall threw light across the side of her face, and she was looking at me with that weighing expression again, the one she had used in the guest room on the first morning, and I was beginning to understand that this was simply how she looked at things she needed to understand, with her whole attention, steadily, without the social ornamentation most people use to make direct attention less alarming. It was, I had come to realize, one of the most unnerving things about her. Also one of the most, I would not have said restful exactly, something adjacent to restful. "Thank you," she said. "You should eat something," I said. "Mrs. Dallow left a tray." Crail was found, before dawn, in the south field of the estate, having apparently turned his ankle in the ha-ha in the dark. Purvis and 2 of the farm men had him, and Purvis's dog had been instrumental in the finding. He was conveyed to the village, and Purvis sent word to the justice of the peace in Ashford, and by morning there was a constable and a rather more considerable chain of events beginning to unfold in Lorne's direction. Goss arrived 2 days later. He was, as always, calm and rather dense with purpose, and he brought with him 2 things of considerable use: a deposition from the physician who had attended Caldwell House, which did not support the story about Bath in any particular, and a letter written by Mrs. Hardcastle herself, which had been left, it emerged, with her solicitor in the city with instructions to open it in the event that she could not be reached by a date in January. Mrs. Hardcastle, it transpired, was not in Bath. She was in Carlisle at the house of her niece, who had been fetched in the night, and who had had the considerable good sense to take her aunt a very long way north and say nothing to anyone. The letters she had refused to give to Lorne were with her niece's husband, who was himself a magistrate, and the content of those letters, which concerned certain transactions that the late Mr. Hardcastle had been made party to and had documented with great care, was now in the hands of people whose interest in the matter was considerably less negotiable than Lorne's. I told Marin all of this in the library. She sat very still for a moment after I finished. "She's alive," she said. "She's alive, and rather formidable it seems." "She always was." A pause. "I simply didn't know the form it took." I gave her a moment with that. "The matter of your safety," I said then, "is not entirely resolved. Lorne is being dealt with," she said. She looked at me. "You used that phrase before." "I use it when it is accurate." "Is it accurate now?" Goss believes so. The connections in the city I mentioned to Lorne were not invented. I settled back. "He will not be in a position to concern himself with you. Fitch, I expect, will remove himself from the county at speed. Crail is rather more straightforwardly a matter for the constable." She let out a breath. It was not a dramatic breath. Nothing about her was dramatic, but it was the first entirely unguarded thing I had seen her do. It was the breath of someone who had been carrying something very heavy for 9 days and had just set it down. "You should," she said after a moment, "return to your ordinary life. You have been thoroughly disrupted." "I have not found it disruptive," I said. She looked at me with faint surprise. "I have found it," I said, "the opposite of disruptive." She was quiet. Outside the library windows the moor was white and still under an afternoon sky that was going from gray to a dark, clean blue, and the light in the room had the quality of December last light, which is the most honest light there is. It shows everything clearly and makes no allowances. "I should make arrangements," she said. "I ought not to stay here indefinitely. There is my cousin in Dorset, and I might write too." "Where do you want to go?" I asked. She stopped. "What?" she said. "Not where you ought to go. Not where is practical or sensible or the thing a woman in your position is expected to do. Where do you want to go?" She looked at me for rather a long time. "I don't know that anyone has asked me that before," she said, "in those terms." "Then perhaps you should take a moment with it." She looked back at the window at the moor. The blue was deepening. "I don't want to go," she said at last, very quietly. "I find that I don't want to go anywhere." She seemed almost surprised by the answer, as if it had arrived before she expected it. She looked back at me. "Which is not, I understand that it isn't, I have no claim on." "You have no claim," I said, "and I have no argument." She went still. "I have been managing this estate alone for 3 years," I said, "and I have been doing it competently, and I have been in the margins of that competence, very quiet and not particularly." I stopped. "I do not, as a rule, speak without knowing what I am going to say. It is a peculiar sensation. You walked out of a blizzard and into my gate, and in 9 days you have been the most. You have made the hall." I stopped again. She was watching me. "I do not want you to go," I said finally, "and let it be plain. That is the position. I recognize it is direct, and I recognize the timing it is what it is, and I thought you would prefer to know it plainly rather than to have me manage the information strategically." "I would," she said, "prefer that." Her voice was slightly unsteady, which was the first time I had heard it unsteady, and I found that I needed to look away for a moment at the window. "I am not," I said, "a comfortable man. I am told I am difficult, and I have no strong evidence that this is wrong. I am better at the practical than I am better, in general, at doing than at—" Another stop. The words were not coming in a useful order. "I locked the gate," I said, "the night you came in. I locked it after you, and I have not entirely found a reason to open it in the conventional sense since." She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said, "I noticed." I looked back at her. "I notice a great many things," she said. And then, with the smallest particular shift in her expression, a shift I was only able to read because I had spent 9 days learning how her face worked, "I am not going to make this easy on you." "I know," I said. "I find that I prefer it that way." She stayed. We were married in April, in the church at Ashford Village, with Mrs. Dallow as witness and Purvis standing at the back in his best coat with his dog, which had strictly speaking not been invited. Goss came down from the city and managed to look both surprised and entirely unsurprised at the same moment, which is a talent he has. It was a cold day but bright, the kind of brightness the moor gets in April when the snow is gone and the heather has not come in yet, and the world is all pale gold and distance. She wore a dress the color of winter cream. She carried no flowers. She said she had never cared for flowers in winter and found them unconvincing in spring, which I thought was characteristic of her. She walked into the church beside Mrs. Dallow, and she looked at me when she reached the front, with that clear, steady look, and I thought, here is a woman who ran for 3 days across an open moor in a blizzard, with a grafting knife and no gloves, and who sat in my library and catalogued her enemies systematically and waited for me to have a plan, and who told me she did not want to go in a voice that was slightly unsteady only once, and who has not been easy on me for a single day since. I thought I would open that gate every December of my life if it meant she came through it. The vicar said the words, we said ours. On the way out of the church in the thin April sunlight, she put her hand in mine, not for form, not for the watching village, but with the same deliberateness she does everything. And she said, quietly for me only, "You locked the gate." "I locked the gate," I said. "Good," she said. And she kept walking into the bright cold day, and she held my hand, and I thought of the blizzard and the lamp and the iron bar of the gate and the one word she had said, and I understood not for the first time, but perhaps for the last time I needed to understand it freshly, that the best things do not arrive with any announcement. They arrive in the dark, half frozen, holding on, and they say please, and you open the gate, and that is all the beginning anything requires. She never did tell me where she put the grafting knife. I have looked. It is not in the kitchen garden. It is not in the drawer of the writing desk, though I checked twice. Mrs. Dallow, when I asked her, smiled in a way that told me she knew exactly where it was and had decided it was none of my business. I suppose it isn't. I have simply made my peace with the fact that my wife, the Duchess of Ashford, who sits across from me at dinner and reads aloud in the evenings with extraordinary precision, and who has reorganized the estate correspondence with a thoroughness that makes Goss write me admiring letters, keeps her own counsel on certain matters, and always has and always will. I find I do not mind. I find, in fact, that I would not have it any other way.